All right, welcome folks. This is 27 Degrees, our angle on Google Workspace. My name is Troy, his name is Rowan, we're your hosts, and we're here to bring you all the latest updates, our go-to tips, and best insights, working as a workspace partner for SADA. Today's episode is all about culture.
That's right, and it's a topic we've been wanting to discuss for some time now, and the reason is that it's such an important part or one of the biggest impacts that we see in an organization after a move to workspace, where we help an organization make the transition. And there's many great impacts culturally of doing so, and that's what we want to break down and discuss in this episode.
And we've got 3 full segments for you, so without further ado, we'll get into Rowan's top 3 updates.
Alright, so our first update is some huge news from Google that we've actually known or they've been teasing for some time, but finally it's been announced and is live within Workspace. So what I'm talking about is the transition from rooms within the chat service to now what's called spaces.
This is an evolution of the chat functionality within Google Workspace, much like we saw Google Meet evolve as the video conferencing solution that's included in the licensing for Google Workspace in order to allow you to maybe transition away from other standalone products that you're using for video conferencing. We talked about that with Chad Pierce from WeWork in a past episode, and we saw the parity of Google Meet rise up. It's no longer just a chat room.
I think we're going to see even tighter integration with things like real-time editing and documents. Also coming down the line as part of these new developments or new functionality will be different roles within the space, allowing you to manage and moderate the content within it. And I also hear news of maybe inline threading, which will allow for much more segmented chat and I think organization of different communication within one large space. Update number 2 is also a very exciting one because this is more weaving of the incredible AI technology that Google is pioneering. This update is going to provide intelligent suggestions within Google Sheets. So when you start typing a formula, Google will start to predict what you're trying to do with the data, and more often than not, intelligently suggest the solution to that, which is fantastic. We already have the Explore functionality within Google Sheets at the bottom right, where you can open it and analyze or ask questions in natural language, but this is even an extension of that into your working practice when you're typing in a formula.
Also, you mentioned employees that have maybe less experience working in Sheets or working in spreadsheets in general. Well, this allows them to feel like they can contribute, what we call collaboration equity, and we'll talk about that in our third segment in a deep dive. Really interested to see how this gets developed and implemented, but another use of Google AI to improve Google Workspace, so we love that.
So this will allow you to set the ability of your working location per day, almost in a similar way that you would set individual working hours if you use Google Calendar. This takes that further and allows you to set the location so that your colleagues and the organization that you work for will have more of an idea and you'll be able to set expectations of your working availability and the location that you're working in, which I think is, as I said, going to be very helpful as we transition into this hybrid working environment where people are working maybe from home a part of the time, maybe in the office, and any other location which is appropriate for them to work for as well.
Obviously, this is our culture episode, and we want to talk about things that are contributing to a positive culture. Google Workspace does that in a ton of ways, and we'll continue to bring you more updates as the roadmap rolls out. In our second segment today, we're joined by Michelle Ambrose, SADA's Chief of Staff, to help us dig into what culture really means and explore some of the impact that she saw firsthand while working at Google for almost 10 years that Google Workspace can have on an organization. Let's go into our interview with Michelle Ambrose. Our next guest joined SADA after nearly 10 years at Google in February of this year. Michelle held numerous positions at Google on both the cloud go-to-market strategy and people ops teams during her time there. For the first decade of her career, Michelle focused on change management and internal communications, both at the Australian federal and state government level and in the technology sector. Here to join us today to talk about culture and the impact Google Workspace can have on an organization is Michelle Ambrose, our Chief of Staff. Welcome, Michelle. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Troy. Thanks, Rowan. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Michelle. We're so excited to have you, especially with some of the different roles you have. And I know that you're such a big lover of Workspace and some of the impacts that it can have. Can't wait to get into dissecting some of that with you.
Yeah, I'm a Google nerd well before my Google time. 2004 Gmail beta account is a space where I've like always been fascinated by the products. I sort of feel like I've grown up professionally alongside them, and then had the amazing opportunity for the past 10 years or so to like get to use them inside the mothership, like where they were built and who built them, and get a great understanding of them. And I think with my background in change management and in organizational design and things like that, like seeing what the tools do for organizations has just like been pretty amazing. And I've always felt really passionately about how can we take that to more and more people. I always loved Laszlo Bock. One time when I was in People Ops, talked about how like we're here to make work better. And I feel like at Google, a big part of the tools was actually part of that. The tools enabled like all the things we were doing to make work better. So,
Michelle, I mean, when I say we're thrilled to have you to join us for this discussion, I mean, the titles that you held at Google were pretty serious. I mean, we're talking chief of staff, head of go-to-market strategy or operations and planning, and head of onboarding, culture, and DEI at Google, and now you're here at SADA. So, thrilled to have you as part of our family here at SADA, and obviously to join 27 Degrees today to chat. And I wanted to ask you, you joined SADA this year in February, been here for about 8 months now. When you join a new organization, or what do you look to evaluate culture at a new organization when you come on board?
Yeah. Well, if we start even thinking about what culture really is, it's easy to grab your core values and stick them on a slide and be like, this is what we do and this is our culture. But really, culture is actually what people do, what they say, how they show up, what they don't say, what the organization rewards. I really look for, and even before I joined, certainly did my due diligence and had a good knowledge of SADA with the strong partnership we've had with Google over the years of how do people show up? Like what is the actual lived, demonstrated behaviors and actions that really are your beliefs? Like that's what I think about culture. They're your beliefs in action. Looking at how people show up, looking at what the company says their culture is. And actually, I'm always looking for the level of congruence between the two. If a company says they're really open and transparent, but you can't see each other's calendars and you can't get access to information and everything's locked up in silos and organizations, that's a signal to me to be like, oh, your articulated culture is different from your lived culture. And that in itself is always a little bit of like, work to do there if you're not actually living what you say you want to do.
Almost like the technology setup and the access to information and different tools mirrors the way that people behave.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've seen so many times when a company or organization makes the move from maybe a legacy platform where people don't have access to information or the tools to be able to communicate, and then they're suddenly empowered by that. Changes things so much.
Totally. And that sort of thing is a really important shift that quite often there's sometimes like, email is email and documents are documents. But I'm like, especially in my experience, and I'm going to date myself, I've done Lotus Notes upgrades earlier in my career. I've definitely lived in other environments. And when I joined Google, after a while, I was like, there's this symbiotic relationship between the tools that doesn't enable the behaviors and the behaviors that change because of the tool's capability. So it's this really cool symbiotic relationship that I think a bit of that's also about how you use it and a lot, what you do with it. But the foundation there is really different when you have a tool that's like built from collaboration, like built in a place where that was actually the existing expectation for how to show up.
Michelle, in that sort of definition of how you evaluate culture, how is SADA doing in your first 8 months here? How do we stack up? I've loved the culture here. I think it's extremely collaborative, and obviously, we've got people working on different projects across teams, and curious to know what you think.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Tony, I think a couple months in, and I said, everything you told me has been accurate. So back to my measure of like what to expect. And I think there's a very strong culture, actually. I've worked in other organizations where the culture is strong, but maybe siloed and very different organizations. So super strong culture. And I think also shaped by both the founders and the family. There's a lot, like, we come from a family business. So I think there's a lot of like, you feel that from the way that people take time to talk, like they're interested. If you look at our benefits and how we look after our employees, like that's really evident. So for me, again, that's that, like, here's this idea and here's how it shows up in practice. And then I think very much from a technology perspective, together we're all in on Google Cloud. And it's actually really interesting to come out of Google and having lived in there for a decade, to see the same tools used in another environment pretty similarly, but there's actually some things I'm like, SADA's doing like our town halls, like the chat in our town hall is fabulous. And like we use it really actively to make what would usually be a very one-way communication vehicle a very interactive experience. That's also a signal of an open culture, a transparent culture where like people will put a bunch of different comments in a very public forum.
I think it's so important that you mentioned leadership there and how much that actually affects the culture and how much it trickles down. And even in the use of technology, the fact that Tony gets involved with all of the workspace tools and such a big advocate makes such a huge difference.
That's actually a key part of culture as well. I think back to that notion of espouse values on a slide, or when you're in office, like on a poster, those are our values. Leaders play a disproportionate role in influencing what people do or don't do and what is or isn't accepted. And if what is on the piece of paper is not what your leadership do, that's usually where you're finding that in that like lack of alignment. I believe also culture belongs to everybody. Everybody in any company like contributes to it and has accountability for owning it and living it and holding each other accountable to it if it's a healthy, strong culture. But that, as you said, that role of leadership, like folks look to the folks who lead the organization and seems to be whatever they're doing is accepted or like a recipe for success. So that's what I'm going to do. So it is extra important for folks in a variety of leadership roles.
We've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I really want to get into the specifics of some of the things that you've seen in your experience, Michelle, when an organization makes the move to workspace, some of the cultural impacts it has, and what that means for the business overall as well.
You're going to go faster. So I'll say before I joined Google, I thought I worked fast. And I probably was. Like I work at a fairly high pace. And I like stepped into Google and it was like, it's like I had been strolling around a country village and all of a sudden I was in the middle of London. And everyone was like flying past me, like on the tube. You know what I mean? The biggest thing I remember is prior to Google organizationally, you would go to a meeting and we didn't have laptops yet. They weren't fully like distributed to everybody, but by now they probably would be in that organization. But you take your pen and paper and you would discuss in the meeting and you would write the actions and you would go back to your desk to do your work. And when I was like, my transition to Google was like, oh no, we're going to talk for 10 minutes and start working together. Like this meeting, we will do things in the meeting. And that kind of was a bit of a shift, but I think that's, so you definitely go faster because you have the tools, right? You have the tools to be real time, in the moment, share it on various screens and actually be very open with that and be collaborative. One thing I'm super passionate about is I think the tools provide increasingly better ways for inclusion. I'm a big fan of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and there's tons of research to show that business outcomes, product outcomes, human outcomes are better when there's more diverse perspectives in the mix. And having tools where if somebody's quieter, they can write it in the doc where everyone can see, or if there's, especially if we're all virtual now. So there's a lot of capabilities there that I think have brought to the fore less dominance of the extroverts in the room by virtue of having tools that allow for more voices. And then the final thing I would say, and this is like core premise that Google really focus on, is increased innovation. So through more collaboration, more diverse perspectives in the room, you're going to get more ideas, like more things are on the table and you can move faster to innovate.
I think about that move that you mentioned, going to Google and it feeling like all of a sudden a shock of how quickly things move. I almost, in my mind, I'm like reversing that and I'm thinking, okay, what happens if you're coming out of school and you're used to using Workspace for education and you move into a workplace or an organization that the culture isn't moving at that speed? You're not going to be very happy, right? I mean, I think long-term retaining talent or attracting talent to your organization, like these are things that people have to think about.
I think this is one of the reasons why we see so much shadow IT. It's something that we see so prevalently because these people that are in the organization want to use the Google tools that they're used to, maybe in their personal or education lives, but they're unable to completely buy these like completely archaic tools that their organization uses, and they know that there's a better option, so they instantly, of course, just jump to using the Google tools. But the problem for the organization there is that there's huge security issues and compliance issues, and there's no proper oversight, and they can't enable their users with all the best features of Workspace using consumer accounts, of course.
Rowan and I definitely feel this way, and I know you probably do too, Michelle, that Google is really now leading the way as far as collaboration and productivity with Google Workspace. We feel like we're talking about the most impactful, beneficial technology for that purpose every episode on this show. So with all of your experience at Google over 10 years, can you just share some insights as far as how Google is leading the way and what their internal culture is around collaboration?
I had a good personal experience that kind of demonstrates that. Was I came in and one of my first projects was to update 50 websites, one for every country at the time with regards to the benefits that the group was running. And we built a template and we're talking about access and controls. And I was like, well, everything needs to be centrally controlled, and they can each of the people in the country can put their things in and they'll come through for approvals, and then we'll have to have someone who approves them. This was me coming from building internet content, other organizations, and seeing content approval processes. And my whole team around me was like, why wouldn't we just let them edit it directly? And I was like, well, don't we need to approve it or control it? And they're like, well, why would our team members intentionally do the wrong thing on their own website? I was like, okay. And they're like, and if they do, we can undo it because it's all in the cloud, it's all editable, and it's all movable. And it was this real light bulb moment for me where I was like, wow. I was like, I thought I was pretty trusty and collaborative, but even my default had been, because I had grown up in tools shaped from this kind of command and control notion.
Right.
And the folks around me who were probably a little earlier in their career but hadn't been at Google for the first 5-6 years were just looking at me like, why would you even do that? I saved a whole headcount of not hiring someone to control those edits. We empowered the team, and over the remaining 4 years, nothing went up that we needed to take down. So that was my great evidence that there were occasionally we'd have to fix somebody, played with the site and change the formatting a little bit, but nothing bad happened.
This is a theme that me and Troy have discussed many times in the show about Google Workspace as a platform, sort of empowering the end user and taking a lot of the unnecessary admin control tasks or abilities and really feeding that back to the user, who can, as you say, do it more efficiently because they're actually in the role. Right. You don't have to have necessarily approval processes and archaic ways of doing things that are inefficient.
It's collaboration equity. That's what we're going to be talking about in our third segment of this episode, and really defining what that is. And it is a buzzword, but it's a real thing. When people are empowered, and you put your faith in them, they more often than not surprise you in the best way, right? Michelle, we really appreciate you coming to chat with us about culture on the show. And I think this is an important conversation for us to continue. And if we can help improve one organization's culture with our conversation today, then I think we've done our job.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Of course, my pleasure.
So great to hear from Michelle, her definition of what culture really is as far as seeing your beliefs in action. In order to dive into that a little bit deeper, we're going to focus our third segment today on something we call collaboration equity. Collaboration equity. It's a term or phrase that we've used a number of times on the show in previous episodes and even earlier in today's episode. And it's something that's been coined by Google in reference to one of the main benefits of a company moving to Google Workspace. VP of Google Workspace, Javier Soltero, is quoted by saying, collaboration equity, or the ability to contribute equally, regardless of location, role, experience level, language, or even your device preference. It sounds like a really simple concept, but the reality is, in practice, a lot of organizations that come to SADA or come to Google are looking for help with exactly this. What does Javier mean, Rowan, when he says, regardless of location, role, experience level, language, or device preference? What does he mean within the terms of Google Workspace?
Essentially, it means providing everyone in an organization the equal opportunity to contribute in a meaningful way by providing them with the base communication and collaboration tools so that everyone in an organization is empowered equally.
In order to look a little bit deeper into how this takes shape within Google Workspace, we can really just go back to that exact definition, right? So when Javier is saying, regardless of location or language, there's a lot of features within Google Workspace that contribute to that specifically, right?
We've all started adopting remote working. I think the idea of a global workforce is now becoming a reality for more and more organizations, and that's certainly something that's always been a core tenet of Google Workspace, but also additional features that allow global working like time zone management in Calendar and even language translation in Gmail. And coming soon in Google Meet, you'll be able to have a call in multiple different languages translated into your native language to understand. Capabilities like that are really what's needed if you want to empower a global workforce and get the most out of it.
Just think about the ability to have more ideas being shared across teams, regardless of the language spoken by those teams, the location that they're working from. And we're driving a cultural change, implementing Google Workspace and allowing for that cross-team work I think is the main impacts that we can see from Google Workspace. If we go back to that definition again, Rowan, regardless of role and experience level, what does Javier mean when he's saying that?
The tools are so intuitive and simple to use. I mean, I think you can see clear evidence of this in Google's consumer services, where they have over 9 services which have over 1 billion active users. So you can see the adoption levels and the ease of use and simplicity that people feel just by the sheer numbers of those 9 different services. I think just making them easy to use and intuitive instantly is a level setter and allows everyone, regardless of how much experience and maybe training they've had on collaboration and communication tools, to just get started. But then additionally, Google weave things like amazing AI capabilities, and they are a real level setter because they allow people that are maybe not so skilled in things like data management and analytics to get results and information out of their data that they would maybe need to spend hours of training on or get support, and they can actually access those using the AI assistants much more easily.
Really sends a message to your employees of your organization if you're really allowing everyone, regardless of role, to have access to the same tools. That one touches home personally for us because our roles aren't as co-hosts of 27 Degrees here at SADA. That wasn't our original role. But because we have a community and culture here internally at SADA that allows us to feel free to contribute on other projects or come up with our own ideas, and thinking about this regardless of role statement is something that touches home personally.
And I think you can see it even in other things like, for example, the frontline worker offering from Google, where they're actually looking at segments of the workforce that maybe don't have access to the core communication and collaboration tools that anyone can use effectively in their work, and trying to actually empower that segment. You have usually in an organization on a very basic level, the sort of desk-based knowledge worker that uses technology and collaboration tools very intensively. And then perhaps you have the frontline or mobile worker, in which they use maybe a mobile device and are on the go and in more of in the field. And in that sense, they maybe don't need all the heavy features that the knowledge or desk-based worker does, but they can still benefit massively from having access to those core tools. So again, through that frontline offering, they're hoping to empower the whole organization to have this access and work towards collaboration equity.
What a great lead into the last point that Javier makes, regardless of device preference. And I think about those frontline workers that may not have a desk and be supplied with a company laptop or a company device. Maybe they're accessing from their personal device. Google Workspace allows them to do that because it's cloud-based. What are some other areas that we see, device preference sort of fade away when a company moves to Google Workspace?
One of the fantastic things about working in the cloud and Google Workspace is that all of these issues with your local machine and device that can occur, a lot of those completely melt away because you're working through the browser and you're really using your machine to act as a window into a Google machine that's doing the work for you. So in a lot of ways, Google can control that environment and take advantage of their scale and security and reliability for you. But it also provides other benefits, like you can log into multiple devices that you own. You can access your data and tools without disrupting each other, and they all sync up very easily, which is great. And there's also a good parity between different device types is incredible, and there's a lot of capabilities shared between both. So no matter which kind of device you're joining from, you have equal opportunity to contribute. We see this on Google Meet, for example. If you join via mobile, you can use many of the same tools that you can in the browser version using a laptop or desktop.
Yeah, and I think about a cultural shift around this as something that Michelle Ambrose mentioned in our second segment, and talking about speed of work. Imagine not having to hard install software onto a device, and as soon as you ship a device to an employee, they're able to open it up and start working immediately, start contributing to their team's goals immediately, or pick up their work from whatever device they have at home or have available to them.
Of course, there will always be specialist requirements and different tools that people need for their particular line of business, but for everyone to know that they have the same access to these core tools, I think is really important for the culture and says a lot.
The overall cultural benefits are huge. The obvious one is improved collaboration. Beyond that, just a stronger culture and well-being as well. We talked about all of those, regardless of location or time of work, all of those benefits that allow for a better well-being amongst your employees as well. That's That's a huge strength of Google Workspace. Another benefit of a move to Google Workspace on your culture is attracting the best talent and then retaining that talent. Overall happiness and work satisfaction improves when there's a stronger culture on the team as well.
And I think a lot of the people maybe graduating from educational institutions, particularly these days, if they're used to the incredible capabilities and real-time editing that Google Workspace tools have to offer, if they then go into an organization that maybe doesn't provide equal access to those tools and capabilities, then I don't think they maybe be so happy, and they might move to an organization that does provide them with the tools that they need.
Collaboration equity is something that we're going to continue to dig into on 27 Degrees. I think it's a main staple of Google Workspace and the cultural impact it can have. I'm really interested to see how collaboration equity evolves as we move more and more to a hybrid and flexible working environment. That's it for another episode of 27 Degrees, folks. Thanks for tuning in. We're so happy that Michelle Ambrose joined us to dig into culture and what it really means in a professional organization, and how Google Workspace can continue to impact that in a positive way. If you found today's episode valuable, head over to Cloud Quarters at www.sada.com/cloudquarters, or check out our YouTube page and subscribe. We can't wait to see you again in 2 weeks when we bring you another episode of 27 Degrees and more of our angle on Google Workspace. Three, two, one. Counting in to record the third segment. Rowan, are you ready? Give me a nod.
Aye.
Okay.